the struggle for privacy in the digital age is actually what's going to define the nature of power. We're undergoing a large shift comparable to the collapse of Rome. These neo-feudal lords like Musk and Zuckerberg are saying they're free speech platforms. But Musk is like arbitrarily banning people that criticize him and just acting exactly as you'd expect a feudal lord to act.
The massive Twitter fight over H-1B visas and migrants working as engineers has apparently already claimed some casualties. Laura Loomer said, "Musk has removed my blue checkmark on X because I dared to question his support for H-1B visas."
We're actually going to start staging a full-blown resistance to surveillance online.
How can we protect our privacy and take back control online? Privacy is disappearing, surveillance is tightening its grip, and the digital world is becoming a battleground. But is there a way to fight back? In today's conversation, I sit down with Rachel Rose O'Leary, a coder, writer, and leading voice in the online privacy movement, who is building encrypted, anonymous systems beyond the reach of the state's surveillance mechanisms. Rachel is one of the key architects behind DarkFi, a revolutionary blockchain platform for anonymous communication and commerce. Through her work, she's helping to create parallel economies and encrypted worlds where individuals can reclaim their autonomy in cyberspace. You don't need to be a technologist. This interview makes the complex world of encryption simple to understand. So if you're concerned about where the digital world is heading, then this episode will open your eyes to the next frontier of the digital resistance. Let's dive in.
Privacy is disappearing. Surveillance is on the rise every single day. Rose, do you think it's possible for us to reclaim our digital freedoms?
Absolutely. And more than that, I think the struggle for privacy in the digital age is actually what's going to define the nature of power for this era that we've entered into, which we can call, the digital age, the information age. It's all kind of resting on this axis of surveillance and privacy or anonymity. And so far, as you said, surveillance has been really kind of winning in that battle. But that's not because technology favors surveillance or because there's an inevitability to, that we're going towards a surveillance world. It's just because anonymity is difficult. But after decades of persistent efforts from cryptographers and developers and, what we call in the crypto world cypherpunks, we're slowly approaching the stage where we're actually going to start staging a full-blown resistance to surveillance online, which is very exciting.
Well, you may have already pre-upped my next question because some are already saying we've already lost the battle. It seems like you wouldn't say that that's the case to you.
Not at all. I think, as they say, we may have lost some battles along the way, but we haven't lost the war. The war is actually only beginning. I think we're very early stage in, this this new era that's come about, in the last, basically since the dawn of the internet. And more recently then with the emergence of smartphones, the digital world is kind of like an alien planet that's entered into the orbit of the Earth and is like creating a gravitational pull that's like sucking human economic activity and intelligence and all sorts of human sociality, etc., into this gravitational orbit of this alien world. And what we see is as the human activity kind of merges with this digital space, the whole economy and logic of the the kind of logic of violence or the nature of violence is changing. So like what I mean to put that like in more simple terms is like basically the rules of the game of the game of society and economics have changed. And so society now is starting to calibrate toward these new rules that are in place from the emergence of this digital world. One of those things is like in the digital world, you can be anyone in theory, right? Like you have, there's a new sense of kind of upward mobility where anyone with a laptop, doesn't matter where they are in the world, they can use the internet to make communities and like form business connections and start like being entrepreneurial online. So it enables this kind of these new financial flows, and this it's kind of ambivalent to geography, and it also comes with these new things like cryptocurrencies that are censorship resistant, borderless, and hopefully in the future anonymous. And this means that wealth has basically turned digital, which means that it's much harder to seize, and essentially for like large institutions such as nation states to seize and to assert violence in that way. So in this new age, what we see is that it's getting more and more expensive for institutions such as the nation states to seize assets and basically restrict the movement of people and money. But so we were talking about surveillance. To tie this back into surveillance is like this whole kind of this new economy and new logic of this digital world that's emerged in some way like has the potential to give a disproportionate power to small groups and individuals, and to reduce the power of like these large scale institutions such as the nation states. And this is a theory that was very popular in like the 90s. You have books such as The Sovereign Individual, which basically describe this thesis of like, where is the world going? How do we master the technological age? How do we anticipate some of these trends and, make the most of them, and kind of learn to utilize them to our advantage? And a lot of the assumptions made at that time basically assumed that the internet would mean anonymity. So privacy, meaning your money it cannot be seized because it's anonymous, it's invisible online. And the same way you could have permissionless free speech online because no one knows what your identity is. So that was kind of the vision in the 90s. And so people saw like the internet was going to lead to a revolution in human freedom, and that the new era was going to tip the balance of power in favor of these small groups and individuals. But that hasn't happened. And I think partially, or a big part of the reason why it hasn't is because these large-scale institutions like nation states, but also these, big tech monopolies, etc., have adapted for the digital age, and they're using this weapon of surveillance as a way to basically reassert their dominion over this new digitalized world. So that's why I say that the kind of the fundamental, crucial battle that determines the balance of power for this era is between surveillance and anonymity. And while surveillance has, through big tech and nation states, kind of it had the first mover advantage. In the early days of internet was very naive. There wasn't much in the way of privacy and anonymity at all. So anyone with the intelligence to do so could already put in place primitive surveillance tooling, and that's built up over time. Encryption, though, it uses the laws of the universe, mathematical laws, to create barriers where surveillance cannot enter. So that's a really exciting kind of fundamental principle that is just imminent in nature that we can use to defend our freedom.
Wow, there's a lot to unravel here. So I love the way you made that distinction of kind of digital realm and almost described it as like an alien planet almost comparatively to this human existence. And I've had many conversations in the last few years about this distinction between how humans behave in the physical, quote unquote, offline world and how they behave in the digital world. And it almost feels like we've reached a level of sophistication in the kind of developed world, in the physical world, but that level of sophistication isn't there. That evolution isn't really there in the digital world. The word dominion that you use struck a chord to me as well, because it feels like if we look through our history as a human race and how much war and pestilence there's been to kind of pursue command and control and power, and it feels like we're at a stage in of our digital evolution where that pursuit of dominion, almost digital land grab, is still underway here. And I look back over the human history to try and get clues to what this digital world could unfold as. Will we see revolutionary periods in the way that we've seen in human history, or will things take a different course? And I know you've talked about even the logo on your cap there for DarkFi is about an inversion rather than a revolution. But before we come to that, I want to first underscore the importance of privacy and indeed anonymity, because there are many that say anonymity is something that enables harmful behavior. That's often the rebuttal I'll see. But I want to start by asking, why do you personally believe that privacy is so critical, particularly in the digital realm?
So it comes down. There's many, almost infinite answers to this question, because I can defend privacy and anonymity from every angle. But I'll just choose kind of two answers. One that relates to what I was talking about now, which is that I think in this digital world that we've kind of entered into, anonymity, privacy, encryption basically tilts the balance of power towards the individual and small groups and communities. And they tilt it away from these kind of new hegemonies, like some new, some old, that have adapted for the digital, such as big tech nation states that are, expanding their kind of hegemony and their control of human behavior through the control of data. So I think that anonymity serves as a correction to this endless kind of power grab, land grab, I think you called it just now, and expansion. And so it's about erecting what we call in DarkFi a kind of digital forest, or a dark forest, that protects communities and allows them to develop in a way that is not under this like constant sense of being watched. I think that being watched, well, we know this. In fact, there's kind of experiments on social experiments that prove this, but being watched changes people's behavior. They begin to adjust their behaviors if they know that they're under surveillance. And an example of this is there's this terrible innovation in prison design called the panopticon, which Michel Foucault writes about. And what the panopticon was, it was a design for a prison where in the center of the prison you have a single tower, and a prison guard is in the tower. So you have a single prison guard, and his tower is surrounded by windows, and he can see out into a prison which is a circle around his tower, and all of the inmates are in rooms which are like transparent, made of glass, so he can see into all of the inmates' rooms. And the theory is that the prison guard doesn't need to be staring at everyone at once in order for their behavior to change. They just need to know that they could be looked at, that they could be under surveillance, for them to start acting in a different way, in the way that they believe that the prison guard would want them to act. So this panopticon type architecture, where everything is fully transparent, everyone's cells are made of glass, and there is a omnipresent prison guard that can at any stage look into the glass. That's not to say they are looking, but they can. This is kind of a description of the internet today, and of course blockchain as well. In fact, blockchain is in some ways worse than centralized platforms such as Twitter, Facebook. But we can talk about, like, from a privacy perspective, we can talk about why that is. But so really, this I find this the risk, the threat of constant surveillance, the presence, even the idea of it, moderates human behavior, and so potentially is creating limits to not just freedom of speech, but also freedom of thought, and therefore freedom to start creating new worlds and new ways of being.
If you're tuning into this podcast, the chances are you're someone who thinks differently. You question the narratives, you want real freedom, and you're looking for unfiltered insights that can actually help you make sense of the world. But let's be real, social media is broken, big tech controls what you can see, and independent voices are being suppressed more than ever. That's exactly why I created the Live Free and Prosper membership community. Your private hub for uncensored conversations, exclusive deep dives, and direct access to a community of like-minded free thinkers. For just £5 a month, you get exclusive content that I can't share publicly, members-only Q&As, and the chance to connect with people who actually get it. So if you're serious about breaking free from the status quo and building a life on your own terms, then join us today. Just head to danastingregory.com/supporter or click the link in the description. That's danastingregory.com/supporter. I'll see you inside. Now, back to the show.
So for me, the big picture of why anonymity and encryption and privacy are important is because they enable people to create new ways of being, and to not just kind of theorize of potential ways that they'd like to live, but also enact those theories and live the worlds that they want to live without fear of persecution. So this is also, I mentioned this idea of a dark forest of encryption that provides a cover for communities online. There's another element to this idea of a dark forest metaphor, which is, a forest is a place, it's a fertile place where, there's life basically growing in every direction. And that's the kind of regeneration and vitality that we want to see in society. And I don't think we could reach that level of vibrant kind of natural ecosystem development in societies without strong anonymity and encryption.
Wow. I mean, you've already instilled a message of hope in your answer in a way, but the skeptic in me, even the cynic in me, which I really resent, but the kind of emergence of this safety culture, safetyism, which almost drives people to want to embrace surveillance as though they need to be protected by some invisible outside force. And this is playing out quite clearly in the physical world. We've seen this in the last few years, but I almost feel the same is now true online. And you spoke of an important point around free thought, let alone free speech. And we're already seeing this idea of wrongthink and thought crimes and even pre-crimes in this digital realm. And I wonder to what extent this is being driven by this safetyist culture. So in your view, what are the greatest risks facing this pursuit towards anonymity? Are we ourselves a barrier?
So I think you bring up an interesting point, because it reminds me, I'm not in England at the moment, but I see online how things are going with the hate speech and police showing up at people's houses because of Facebook posts. And it seems to have gone like in a very authoritarian direction very quickly, where there's very little defense for free speech in England, unlike somewhere like America, where they have the constitutional protection for free speech as a concept. It seems in England, as you say, this kind of the safetyism, which is really a justification for the nation state and its power, because it says that you need to have this strong authority to arbitrate and to manage humans, because there's these risks like crime and so on. So I get what you're saying. In answer to your question, how does anonymity kind of exasperate, I suppose, the anxiety around like safetyism? I think so I there's a few things here. But one is that you mentioned in your previous question that it's helpful to look at the history of human society and times of revolution, and we can reflect on these past eras and we can kind of draw judgment from them and try to see what can we learn? Will our era reflect these past eras? And I think what's very interesting to look at is other periods of history where you had these kinds of huge changes to what I described earlier as the logic of violence, or the economy of violence, or more simply the game logic of society. When you have these kinds of deep structural changes, and then you witness this kind of sudden reconfiguration of society around that, what tends to happen? And what tends to happen is, there are some entities that suffer enormously. There are other entities, sometimes new entities, that flourish from this environment. And there's also these kinds of these transient periods where we have the decline of one era and the emergence of the other at the same time. And the new era is kind of resembling the old era in various ways. So classic example is after the end of Rome. So the Roman Empire collapsed, and these Germanic tribes that were in its kind of outskirts began to take precedent. But in many ways, they retained certain features of Roman life. So there was a intermediate period where there was a new kind of post-Roman world that was forming. But at the beginning, it kind of resembled the Roman era. And I think we're at a comparable moment in history right now, where we're undergoing a large shift comparable to the collapse of Rome, or other huge shifts in human history. The decline of the church in the Reformation. There are other moments we can draw comparison to, but so what I think is we're in the middle of this transition. Not everything that happens is going to be necessarily good. There will be probably, because we're in this moment of transition, there's probably going to be human suffering, and there's probably going to be a transformation in the nature of violence, where we won't necessarily see the disappearance of violence, but merely violence changing its shape and being wielded by different actors than before. So, I guess what I'm saying is I'm resistant to like utopian thinking, which says that anonymity will fix everything. I don't think it's going to fix the fact that, you know, humans are like have these kind of like deep psychological tendencies towards like you know, the pursuit of power and like the, you know, simple kind of egoistic drives and so on. I don't think anonymity is going to change that. I think it probably could enable like new monsters in a way. But I think it's so vital that it exists as a counterforce to surveillance, that I think the benefit of having the presence of encryption and the possibility of encryption is outweighs the risk that anonymity brings, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I want to kind of play with this idea of this transitionary time, because I felt that now for some time. I mean, just harking back over the last few years, I think the value that was placed upon certain freedoms, I think, had diminished significantly. But the COVID chapter had restored for many, having witnessed so much censorship and you know, cancel culture. But not only that, a rise of biosurveillance, a different form of surveillance, and how that had implications for our ability to access society in certain ways. I think that created a counterculture in of itself, and a kind of renaissance of the value of digital privacy and physical privacy, and to be free from forms of surveillance. I think it also acted as a counterculture against the safetyist culture that's kind of risen. There's a kind of acknowledgement that society has lost resilience, it's weakened. So with all of this, it's almost spawned a counterculture. And of course, as we're recording this now, it's the 21st of January. It's the day after the American inauguration of President Donald Trump. And with that, you know, in the weeks preceding it, we've seen the likes of Mark Zuckerberg stepping forward and making great revelations of the pressure that he was under by the former administration. We're now seeing alignment with Elon Musk and the Trump administration. So some would say this is the winds of change, and that, you know, this is a step forward as part of that transitionary moment. I think others are skeptical. Where do you see this political shift in this overall transition that you've outlined?
Absolutely. So my mind was kind of blown when Trump released the Trump coin, especially because it's the second coin that he's released. Like, I think he had, you know, the World Liberty Financial or something it was called before, and then now he released another one. So it's a grift, you know. But I think it's very interesting because for me, it's a demonstration of the fact that governments are struggling to retain their position within this new cyber economy. And like Trump, the president of the United States, launching a meme coin, for me is an example of, you know, the traditional power structures trying to adapt to this new digital age, information age. And I think it signifies the kind of their weakening relevance, and it's their attempt to kind of regain some of that relevance by pandering to this new economy. So, you know, for me, it's like agorism. We'll probably have to define what that is, but you know, in a simple terms, it's kind of the people's economy. Agorism eating away at the nation state. For me, it looks like an example of that. Not to say that it's a good thing, you know. It's like it's clearly a massive grift. And again, I do think in this transient era that we're in is potentially very dangerous. And you know, the stakes are very high. And I think that's something that Zuckerberg and Musk and Trump and Thiel with Palantir, you know, who's a very big brain. Thiel is like very conscious of the trends that are present, and, you know, deep kind of philosophical awareness of cryptocurrency, and yet, also working on automated AI weaponry and this like really a kind of Machiavellian figure. So like we have these extreme like billionaire types that are, playing these critical roles. And for me, in this digital age, they're adapting their strategies to the world that we've kind of described. This digital world where the rules have changed. So we can see in real time the impact of this new economy or new game logic on the lives of these politicians and these non-politician kind of pseudo-politician characters that have become increasingly relevant, like Musk, Zuckerberg, etc. So for me, it just demonstrates actually the validity of the thesis that I've kind of semi outlined, and as well, it underscores the severity and the kind of danger of this current era where we're seeing in politics a mimicry of the digital and an attempt to kind of retain their position and dominion over the digital. We're also seeing inside of the digital kind of world the opposite effect, where it's kind of becoming increasingly political and in some ways resembles the previous era. So from both sides, we have this kind of mimicry which I think is very kind of typical of a transient era. And also, I don't mean to imply when I say like we're in a transient era between the era of nation states and this new digital era, I don't mean to imply that the digital era will be like 100% digital. Like that will be like, it's like some kind of metaverse where we're all going to be like on VR headsets or anything like that. I don't think that's necessarily the case. That's like one outcome. But I think that outcome depends on, institutions like the nation states remaining relevant. And I think there's other possible outcomes, which are, basically the growth of decentralization, the balance of power tipping in favor of small groups and individuals, and the kind of, there's a word, devolution, which is, it has a negative connotation. It means to evolve backward. But it also means basically power shifting from the monopolies into the peripheries. So I think we could see a kind of devolution of power and a restructuring of power in favor of small groups in the digital age. So, that's my hope. And I think we can also manifest that. It's not automatic or inevitable. But if we kind of study this era and we like think about what are the new rules, we try to analyze those rules and try to use them, adapt to them, just as these guys Trump and Musk and so on are also adapting, then we're in a better position to orientate these trends towards our objectives and human freedom ultimately.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So obviously the likes of Musk and Zuckerberg have had praise recently because they've, in many ways, perceived to have liberated the ability to speak freely once again, with Musk purchasing X and removing a lot of the filters, although I must add I'm still definitely shadow banned on X. I've run many experiments to confirm the above, and I've also written to the company who have, in written response, told me that I'm definitely still suppressed with ad infinitum. So I guess that's my British government at fault for that. But just putting that aside, and Zuckerberg is now stepping up and talking about the removing these fact checkers. But this is only one piece of the puzzle, because of course the business model for both of those entities rely entirely on vast amounts of data and accumulating as much data as possible as they can about you in order to sell advertising and services. So it's not the full picture. So what we're talking about today is not just our ability to speak freely, but actually to retain our privacy and pursue anonymity. So I want to bring it to practical points a little bit here for those at home who are thinking, okay, well, it does seem like we're at this transitionary period where the tide may be churning, and I resonate with what you're saying about the power being devolved and coming back to people, the pursuit of decentralization, and people being able to have choice again about how their data is used. So my question to you is, what kind of solutions are now emerging can help us to win this battle for online privacy, for our ability to liberate ourselves from digital surveillance? What sort of things are out there and emerging right now? And maybe start broad with the technology types, and then really we can hold it down from there a little bit and talk about DarkFi, etc.
Yeah, sounds good. So just to comment on what you said, also, it's funny because these neo-feudal lords like Musk and Zuckerberg they're pandering to the climate by saying they're free speech platforms. But Musk is like arbitrarily banning people that criticize him and just acting exactly as you'd expect a feudal lord to act when one of his serfs expresses an opinion against him. So really, I don't believe that our battle is over by any means. And I think really the only way to avoid this situation where you have a kind of feudal lord type hierarchy within technology is to do away with those kind of actors, which is a technical infrastructural problem.
It's time for a quick word from one of our partners. If you believe in the freedom to communicate, the right to privacy, and freedom from corporate surveillance, then you need to check out Proton. Many of you would have heard of Proton Mail. Proton is born out of the desire to create an internet that puts people before profits. Proton helps you to maintain control over your digital life, whether it's sending messages encrypted through Proton Mail, or browsing privately with Proton VPN, or securely storing your important documents with Proton Drive. Proton is the ultimate tool for safeguarding your digital freedom. Don't let your data be sold or your privacy be compromised. Go to danastinGregory.com/Proton and start using Proton to protect your digital life today.
What we need to do is we need to move from this architecture of there are servers which are centralized and, like in the case of X, Twitter, just like maintained by a company that Musk has like full control over. And it's basically just like a data center running with machines running the Twitter code. And then you have clients, which are basically all of your phones, and they are querying this central server. So you can imagine it's like this, and then there's like the lines coming to all the phones. So that's the architecture of kind of most websites, and if not all, pretty much all websites. And what this means is the person controlling that central point can arbitrarily delete your data, can block you, can read everything that you write. So it has implications both for privacy, anonymity, and for speech, censorship, and so on. So as I said, it's an architectural problem. And so the solution that architecturally is peer-to-peer technology, which basically means instead of those phones all connecting to a central server in the middle, they connect to each other. And there's no agent within that network that can censor or delete stuff. So that's the solution to free speech on a high level. Is like okay, you just need peer-to-peer infrastructure that people run themselves, and that way it's completely censorship resistant. But there's another layer to that, which is also if you want to have like some privacy anonymity as well, then you need to have encryption on these nodes. And that means people can talk to each other without talking to everyone. So you can have that kind of selective communication and you can conceal your identity. all of that is possible, and DarkFi is working on that. But to kind of contextualize this in the context of privacy more broadly, so we have various different efforts underway. There's like a number of levels to like privacy. There's the actual encrypting of the data, like, for example, the communication data. And you have projects such as Signal that do this very well. But their Signal is incomplete. As far as I know, it's centralized. So there's other projects like DarkFi that are making a peer-to-peer alternative. So you just have it on your phone, and it's completely censorship resistant. Then you also have basically the whole financial privacy side, which is, there are projects like Monero, which enable you to send money in a way that's fully anonymous. DarkFi is also in this world. So as well as offering a kind of encrypted censorship-resistant communication, we also have financial tooling. So you can send money. So it's kind of like product-wise, it's a bit like Telegram, but encrypted and peer-to-peer, and with these financial features. So then back to the kind of privacy landscape. So we also have this other pillar of privacy, which is what's called network level privacy or metadata privacy. So that's basically when we're on a peer-to-peer network. Like I mentioned, we've phones talking to each other, and there's no central server. They're sending data to each other. And what happens is, even if these messages are fully encrypted, so they're, for an outside party observing the network, it's just noise, right? It's encrypted. It's just random strings of numbers and mixed with alphanumeric strings. But you can still learn something about the communication by observing the network. So you could probably learn where those phones are located, the IP addresses. You can learn when those messages were sent. You could learn what is the size of the message. So you can learn a bunch of stuff, and that, when you put it all together, it can actually be quite useful, and it could help de-anonymize people, even if the content of the message is encrypted. So that's the kind of other fundamental pillar to privacy. It's not talked about much because it's a bit kind of more abstract than just thinking about like the encryption of the contents, because then it's like, oh, there's all this other what we call metadata around that's being sent, and it gets kind of complicated. But there are projects working on this. So Tor is a browser which allows you to browse the web without revealing any metadata. There's another project called NIM, which is, they have a VPN product now, NIM VPN, which is similar. It has the same goal, but a different approach, and it has some benefits against Tor. It's like in some ways more anonymous than Tor. So then DarkFi actually makes use of this. So we're not focused on that, but we use Tor. So it's possible to use DarkFi with Tor. And in the future, we want to add support for NIM as well. And when we kind of put all this together, we end up with a highly anonymous tech stack, basically the holy grail of fully anonymous, peer-to-peer, censorship-resistant communication of finance, which is what DarkFi has been building towards for the past 5 years.
Wow, amazing. I want to expand a bit more on DarkFi in a moment, but I want to come back to something that I touched upon earlier, which is often the critique of anonymity, which is, its ability and potentially to help fight crime. And so, for instance, some of that metadata, if it enables someone to determine what time it was sent, potentially what location it was sent from, if there had been some illicit or illegal activity that was, non-pure in its intent, that metadata potentially could help solve crime. So what's your take on that? And do you have a counter argument against that in terms of pursuing the absolute holy grail of anonymity? You know, could that theoretically enable dark actor, to pursue organized crime, etc., in a way that would prevent authorities from ever capturing them in the digital realm? What's your assessment of that particular critique?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the basic assessment is that crime is the absolute minority of all human activity. So if we start as a society, basically allowing the actions of a minority to restrict the freedom of a majority, for me, that feels like a disproportionate kind of cost, a price to pay. So if the price is that, everything has to be surveilled, in order to have like a world without crime, like we've essentially walked into a police state type situation. So really, like to avoid a police state, we need to have encryption and strong anonymity available to everyone. But that also does potentially enable bad actors. But I don't think anonymity is going to solve that. Like what solves for bad actors is like spiritual reform, like moral and political development of society, having people that are not like economically desperate, and these kind of factors. So it's kind of outside the realm of technology. It's a non-technical problem. And also, we do see this a lot, like with the surveillance being used to justify, for example, there's this regulatory body called FinCEN, I think it's called. It's a financial enforcement international task force type body. And they're kind of constantly increasing financial surveillance, and they've been kind of ramping up over time the laws. So it's like, okay, you can't send more than whatever, $10,000. Oh, now it's 5,000. Oh, now it's going to be 1,000. And they just kind of keep, without giving your date of birth and your social security number and all this data. And it's like the kind of the economic freedom, even in the past like 50 years, has just gone like really dramatically fallen. So, and this is like enabled by like the digital world. When we had just like full on cash based society, this wasn't a problem. People could do economic transactions with each other without asking permission from whatever nation state or any other, or the bank, or whatever entity is your intermediary now, that's kind of constantly involved in every transaction. So yeah, I think that's probably the better way. And what we've seen is that in these huge efforts to enforce, like for example, these financial task force that are constantly expending millions, if not billions of dollars, trying to surveil everything, they noticed that the amount of money seized, like that they actually get as a result of those enforcement actions, is orders of magnitude less than the amount of money they invest in trying to surveil everything. So you realize it's not about the effectivity of this as a policing method. It seems just to be more about generic control of human economic activity. And so that's obviously like very concerning and problematic. I think that, probably like back in the days, I love watch like everyone does, like, what was it? The like various like old school police dramas, and there's got these like heroic detective types that are just like using their intelligence. So I think we need like a return to that kind of police work where, basically they need to go back to like actually investigating crimes and like, like figuring out what's happening using their brain and not like over relying on like this like police state metadata analysis, because it's a net negative for human freedom and it doesn't even work as well as people think it does.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we need a whole world of philosophical education in order to proliferate this type of thinking, but I'm going to try and keep it practical. So in a moment, I want to dive deeper into what DarkFi is. And I just want to explain some of the things that are coming up for me just as you started to introduce DarkFi in terms of its, on one hand, I want to understand, in practical terms, how can it support this idea of pursuing privacy, anonymity? How can it be a counter tool against surveillance on a practical basis? And you've outlined some of the functions that can possibly enable that, but I want to explore that a bit more. But then more broadly, it then leads me into something that really kind of punctuates a lot of the areas we've already looked at, partly around this transitionary period, almost revolutionary period. I want to talk about the logo and, how it could be a potential inversion. I want to spawn that level of thinking off our initial discussion, how it can actually play a role in disrupting authoritarian regimes. How can these types of technologies, and by the way, this isn't like 1,000 questions in one. I just want to articulate to you where my mind is going. How these types actually disrupt authoritarian regimes, both in the Western world and the types of authoritarian culture that we're witnessing, but also in more developing countries that are under kind of dictatorial rules. And then a whole field of counter-economics, which you touched on earlier on, and how this can lead to almost like a parallel polis in the digital world. New tools that enable us to form online communities and marketplaces, so there's this entire world that is spawned in front of me. And then I'm looking at, my brain has gone to like quantum computing, and is that a benefit? Is it a net benefit? Is it going to be a challenge? But let's bring it right back, first and foremost, to practical terms. How specifically can you define DarkFi, and tell us about the name first of all? What does DarkFi mean? And then let's talk about what it offers as a solution set, or what it promises to offer.
Yeah, so I'll talk about DarkFi, the name and the kind of symbolism. So it comes from, there's a historical dimension where DarkFi actually comes from a project called Dark Wallet, which was a big anonymous Bitcoin wallet that was made in like 2013, and there was a few major kind of figures involved at the time. There was Amir Taki, who's my co-founder at DarkFi. There's Cody Wilson, who made the Liberator pistol, the first 3D printed gun. There was Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. And so there's all these people kind of worked on this anonymous Bitcoin wallet, which never really became a usable product, but the idea remained. And DarkFi is basically the evolution of that original project. So we get our logo from Dark Wallet, and it was actually created by Cody Wilson, who, if you're familiar with his work, is a kind of like big brain genius when it comes to tactics like inversion and symbolism, and he's read a lot of philosophy. And the basic idea in those days was this idea of basically the powers that be, the surveillance state, the nation state, they say privacy is like something scary and bad, right? They say it's going to cause a rise in people going off grid. What they call the going dark problem. So the going dark problem is basically that encryption is going to spread, and it's going to result in a loss of control by federal entities. And there was a lot of kind of fear mongering around this. We've talked about it this evening. Fear mongering and kind of like this. There's a specific term for when fear around technology. I think I'm not sure the term, it's like shock or fear mongering. There's a special term for when it's like technological anxiety around technology. So they used a lot of that to basically criminalize privacy and to make it seem like something evil and bad and dark, So DarkFi basically enters that symbolic space that has been prepared by the surveillance state. It occupies it, and from there stages a resistance. So it basically says, yes, we are the nightmare that you described. And, we are undermining your power and your dominion. And basically we've been compelled into being by your corruption of power. And, in some ways we are the answer, the only answer to the surveillance dystopia that you've offered us. So that's the kind of original symbolic violence of DarkFi. And the logo is actually an upside down version of the Eye of Providence, which is you see it on the dollar bill. It's like an Illuminati symbol, and you see it a lot. Like there was a CIA project called Total Informational Awareness, which was the precursor to the surveillance campaign that Snowden figured out and shared in his revelations. So the origins of a lot of the US surveillance is in this program from the CIA called Total Informational Awareness. And it has this sign flipped, and it's an eye with a pyramid like that, like on the dollar. And the eye is kind of like looking out over the earth. And the idea is like it's got a Latin phrase at the bottom of the logo. This is real, you can look this up, which says something like power through knowledge in Latin. And so basically DarkFi was inverting and correcting this, and hence the upside down triangle. And when we have the upside down triangle, it kind of drags in a lot of feminine symbology and so on. And but from my perspective, I have been bringing my own kind of a mimetic dimension to DarkFi, which is different to this kind of original symbolic violence of the inverted symbol, which is basically comes from a critique that I have of a lot of crypto anarchist movements. And so just to define that term for those in your audience that might not know what crypto anarchy is, it's the most consistent political position in crypto. And it's basically everything we've been talking about. So it's like using crypto to recenter power away from the nation state and towards small groups and individuals. And it was the original political program for crypto, but over time it's kind of been eroded. So that's crypto anarchy. Crypto anarchy in general, it symbolically uses a lot of these kinds of inversions. You see always crypto anarchists in general, they wear black. I'm doing it right now, but there's this sense of this kind of resistance to the status quo. It's like a subcultural. It comes from also the logic of punk, which is like an anti-system approach, where punk is like a negation of the order. It says no, but there's a limitation to that as well, where you don't want to be stuck in this negative position where you're just like a inversion or a reaction to a given order. You also want to be in a affirmative position where you're actively proposing a new future, and you're not just this kind of counterpart or mirror reaction, resistance force to another thing. So what I like to say is that darkness, it's not just about the opposite, the negative of light, which is the kind of the violence of surveillance. It's also the darkness of potential and creation, the darkness of the unknown, symbols like the outer space, the deep cosmos, the ocean, the forest, the dark forest. So forest and darkness being actually something that's generative and essential to life and the recreation of life. So that's where I kind of position DarkFi within this new symbology of forests as being something that brings a new lease of life to society, something that allows society to regenerate and decouple from the existing kind of dominion of power, and to create kind of new centers of power, new multipolar reality, which I see as kind of like a dark forest enabled by encryption. So yeah, I think that's the basic introduction to the memetics of DarkFi.
It gives a really strong understanding that the underlying, I suppose, what led to it being created, the philosophy behind it. What does that mean in terms of practical terms? What will people be able to do with the tool set that you're developing?
Right. So I mentioned previously that DarkFi has essentially two pillars. First is communication. Second is finance. So we think that it's wrong to kind of emphasize one over the other, and that actually you need to have both. You need to have the freedom of communication and the freedom of economic freedom at the same time. So the kind of core of DarkFi is like an app, which we're working on. We're actually releasing it, the kind of early version of it this week. So very excited by that. But it's a chat app where it's very anonymous. So it's peer-to-peer. It runs on a mobile phone and any operating system, Windows, Mac, Linux. Of course, we prefer Linux, but you can run it on anything. And it's highly anonymous. You can change your nick, so you can appear as anyone that you want to. You have encrypted channels, encrypted DMs, direct messaging, and also you can run it over Tor. So it's possible to do it in an extremely anonymous way. That's the very first version of DarkFi. DarkFi also has a blockchain. And basically what that enables is a bunch of financial use cases. So you can send money from one person to another. You can exchange money. So you can, make use of similar kind of tools that you have on most blockchains. So exchanging between currencies. But also we put a big emphasis on kind of coordination software. So when we're thinking about who are our users, we like to think of like the ideal user being this like a group of people, of which I'm sure there are many in your audience, that are interested in kind of living in a non-surveilled way and experimenting with new kinds of ways of life. So I know that your podcast is popular with a lot of people involved in various back to the land movements, things like permaculture, and basically trying to imagine a new way of being that has decoupled from the old way of like domination by nation states and other traditional institutions. So we want to enable those kinds of groups. So ways that we do that, I mentioned communication, I mentioned finance, but critically, we also enable finance like of the group. So basically, you can keep your money in a collective treasury that anyone in your group can, potentially view and read the treasury, but they can't spend from the treasury unless people in your group basically all or certain enough of them agree that the transfer is legitimate. So basically, it enables groups and communities to operate a shared treasury. This is interesting for all sorts of projects and companies and phenomena. But I guess that the use case I'm most interested in is in these kinds of experimental ways of being and new kinds of micro societies that are cropping up in our transitional era. So we're planning to enable them with anonymous tooling and the ability to make financial decisions as a group in a way that is impervious to surveillance and censorship resistant and peer-to-peer.
Wow. I mean, it feels to me that it has an activist component, maybe not activist, but it may be maybe not broad enough to encompass some of the use cases you've outlined, but it seems to kind of lean into what we talked about or touched upon briefly earlier with counter economics, this idea of a parallel polis. Could you explore how this could be a tool that can enable that type of counter economics or agorism that you briefly defined earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose to step back, I think I'll first bring some of these terms together. So we mentioned agorism, we mentioned crypto anarchy, we mentioned very briefly cypherpunk, and we mentioned parallel polis, parallel society. So we can kind of academically argue about the differences between these terms, but I think fundamentally it's talking about the same thing. And so, it all comes back to this idea of a people's economy, a freedom economy that is outside of the nation state, which for me means outside of surveillance generally. And, basically one that can operate according to its own rules, which might be non-coercive. And so it all kind of comes back to this. How does DarkFi enable that as a toolkit? I think the key thing is just that the issue is that nowadays any kind of group that's testing out these principles or experimenting with new ways of life and trying to define the logic of this new transitional era, trying to create new forms of society, they're all relying on centralized tech and often are subject to surveillance and censorship. So I think as the stakes are getting very high, we've seen these increasingly now what's arguably the most powerful or among the most powerful governments on earth is, pandering to the digital era and, kind of doing this weird mimicry of the desires of the people for non-surveillance, non-censorship, etc. So we've seen the stakes are very high. We have these political actors competing for dominance in this transitional phase. Any group that is legitimately posing a threat to that existing order is vulnerable to attack if they're using centralized platforms with no privacy protections, which at the moment pretty much everyone is. So, we're basically allowing them to be, by releasing this toolkit, allowing them to be anti-fragile and resistant to these kinds of state-level attacks. We expect basically in the years that come after this, and it's already happening now, but the stakes are going to get higher, and the attacks on these smaller groups that are freedom advocates is going to kind of progress and potentially worsen. So DarkFi and other privacy tools are there to protect people when this kind of this progression plays out. And our goal is basically that the applications we offer with DarkFi, like the product, etc., will be easy enough technically to use, and that like there's no barrier to entry, and that anyone can just with a single click enter into a world that is fully censorship resistant and anonymous. So that's our goal, and we think that's where things get really kind of interesting, is when the barrier to entry is low enough that anyone can access the tool. And that's where we've been going. You know, it's like it's not, we're not there yet. As I said, we've just releasing the very kind of early version of the product this week. But that's very much a goal of ours, and as is part of the reason of how we hope to get these communities on there. And we also realize that it's not the case in technology that that it's necessarily the better tech that wins. You know, through the history of technology, you see many examples of better designs, you know, more freedom enabling designs and infrastructures that are being offered but are not being that are not adopted by people. And you have to kind of wonder why is that? And so I think a big part of the problem is like this naive assumption that if the tech is there, people will necessarily grab it. And I think the history of technology disproves that. And actually, the way to get people using your technology is first and foremost to have a community around the software. So, you know, that's also why I mentioned we have this emphasis on communication, because, you know, we're not just building in the abstract. We have an active community that's already using the software, and we're slowly equipping that community with like, you know, with features such as finance and so on. And so as we progress, we hope to involve more communities and individuals and embolden them with the tools, and also, you know, the philosophy to execute those visions. I mentioned philosophy just briefly because we have a big emphasis of that in DarkFi. Every second Wednesday we have a philosophy discussion where, you know, anyone can propose a book and we discuss it together. We have a philosophy journal about agorism, which is called Agorism in the 21st Century, where we try to raise the discussion around cryptocurrency and technology, to kind of to get people talking about these subjects and thinking about where they want the future to go and how we can make use of this changing paradigm and in the service of freedom. So we also offer training to people, like so we're not just like kind of providing people with tools. We're also trying to empower people to use those tools. So, you know, we have a group of people learning programming on DarkFi. We place a big emphasis on, you know, basically equipping yourself with technical skills, studying philosophy, studying economy, and, you know, like empowering like a generation of people to as part of this technology as well.
Amazing ambition. Wow. And my question to you is, do you fear the old world coming after what you're doing? I mean, I'm thinking of Pavel Durov at Telegram, and was arrested for, you know, what he was doing with Telegram, you know, all these different charges put forward, effectively almost levying other people's crimes at his doorstep, which is, in my mind, completely ludicrous. How can he be deemed responsible for criminal activities of third parties? But do you fear that? Do you worry about that?
I mean, I definitely think it's a risk, you know, and I don't fear it. I kind of accept it, and in a way, I try to draw power from it, like rather than it being like a fearful thing where it's like stripping my energy or wearing me down. I'm like, I'm like, no, it's like if they come after us, it's because we're doing something right and we're genuinely, posing a threat to the nature of power. And basically, if they come after us, it kind of proves our thesis is correct. And it means also that our technology has reached a critical mass. So there is a weird, like, obviously, that would be very stressful, and like I don't want that to happen. But if it does happen, in a weird way, it will have proven that we've put the pressure on the right place, and that we were right when we assumed that the whole kind of the most critical battle to define the nature of privacy in the digital age is that between surveillance and anonymity. That the kind of, when we accept that, then it's like, okay, if that's true, then it definitely means that the stakes are high. This is a great risk. Like we're putting ourselves in the line of danger when we're working on DarkFi. So basically, if we do create problems for ourselves in that regard, it proves our point. Not saying I want it to happen, just saying, I have ways of dealing with it.
Well, I'm hopeful you can use your own tool set so that you can code it in a way that is untraceable, etc. There we go. Is it going to be an open beta? You said that the product is going to be first release, or is that, just an initial trial product for a select group at this point?
Yeah, it's gonna be released openly. So we'll see what happens, how well it holds up to the test. But the plan is, right now we've shared it. It's already in our Telegram channel as of the 21st of January. We put a beta release in our Telegram group for people to test. So it's already kind of being tested. But this week, we're going to release that original app, and we're also going to have a bunch of announcements incoming because we've made great progress on the blockchain of DarkFi as well. So we're probably going to release a testnet very soon. And so there's going to be a bunch of news coming out. So stay tuned, basically, for updates.
And is the Telegram channel the best place to find out about those updates? Or the website? What's the best way for people to find out what's happening?
Yeah, Telegram is great. It's DarkFi _chat, if my memory serves me well, or just DarkFi chat. The Telegram is great. It's linked on the website, which is dark.fi. So that's probably the best place. There's Twitter account. We're not that active, but we do put announcements up there when they happen. And then the absolute best place is always on our chat app, Dark IRC, which you should be able to join with just like one or two, like one click, I think maybe 2 clicks, like from this week. So hopefully see you guys there.
Amazing. And then what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from our discussion today?
So I the main thing is, like, the too long didn't read of this like entire discussion is, we're in a transitional era. The rules of the game are changing. This doesn't mean that the era that's emerging is necessarily going to be better. It could be worse. But what's critical is that we analyze these trends, and that we make use of them in the service of freedom. So, like, I do recommend a book called The Sovereign Individual. This book was written in the 90s, and it basically tries to be like a toolkit for analyzing the digital world that we're coming into, and like it forecasts the trends and how the kind of the nature of violence is going to change. It wasn't perfect, but its basic kind of methodology was, when you look at any period of change without history, what you see is that like there are these hidden variables, what they call the logic of violence. This kind of like things like subtle economic kind of relationships that start to change due to the emergence of a new technology or, the decline of an old institution. So like an example is like the emergence of capitalism 500 years ago. What happened there was there was like a few things that happened all at once. But like firstly, the Black Death decimated the population in Europe, which changed the economy significantly. So there were much less people, and it meant that workers were able to negotiate a much higher rate. So they started to get paid a bunch of money. So you had the kind of the enrichment of the poor, of the proletariat class, and so they started to get richer, and they were quite free as well because they had their own land and so on. But then you have like the gunpowder and the discovery of gunpowder, and gunpowder made it cheap to basically hire armies and to have them on full time and have these small weapons where they could just very easily have armies go and seize land. So you start having the mass privatization of land away from these like proletariats that had held the land as like a commons. And at the same time, you also have the printing press, which, basically had the like flow of information, started to question like the authority of the church and its monopoly on tax collection, which was happening. And that led to the Reformation. And these, like the prevalence of gunpowder and guns, which completely made it very cheap to assert violence and just kind of seize land, and also to go over and like start colonial missions. These were all factors that basically shifted Europe from the feudal era into the capitalist era. And there's many other factors, but this is an example of how the logic of violence changed through these new technologies, and society very quickly was like brought over and adjusted to this new logic. So I think and this is the thesis of the sovereign individual, we're undergoing a similar change today. Rather than making kind of moral judgments on the nature of that change, I think the best thing we can do is master it by like analyzing the trends that are happening, by learning about the technologies that are set to define this era, and by using them in service of freedom. Because as much as we can use these kind of the awareness of these trends to project what might happen, the future is not set. It very much depends on, individuals and groups, teaming up and wielding technology and other factors to basically assert their freedom and a new way of being. So these are the key takeaways. Basically, the importance of like human agency and our ability to shape the future through the kind of awareness of the various trends that are in place. And I recommend the sovereign individual as an analysis of this trend. Also basically mastering the world of technology, which is what defines this era, and paying particular attention to the axis of power of surveillance and anonymity that I believe is set to define the nature power in the digital age.
Wow, mic drop. Thank you, Rachel Rose O'Leary. What a compelling overview, philosophical discussion, yet practical at the same time. Thank you so much for your time here on the Dan Astin-Gregory podcast. If you'd like to get closer to the conversation, then please do come and join us at danastingregory.com/supporter and join our Live Free and Prosper community, where we're regularly exploring ideas like this, as well as practical takeaways. So do come and join us there. And please do share this episode. This is an issue that affects us all. And if you care about privacy, anonymity, then this conversation is massively important to get out there into the wider sphere. So thanks very much for watching, listening. Please do subscribe. We'll see you again very soon.